on in, ladies and gentlemen, make yourself comfortable. You may be seated in the seat. Come on in, ladies and gentlemen, make yourself comfortable. You may be seated in the seat. Come on in, ladies and gentlemen, make yourself comfortable. You may be seated in the seat. Come on in, ladies and gentlemen, make yourself comfortable. You may be seated in the seat. Let's see, creatures of habit. Sometimes people want to sit in the same seat, but technically you can sit in any seat. I'm glad one has a seat. There's one right over there. Lord's part. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. Make it for your patience, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for your understanding. I know you've had a weekend, and we're going to resume at this point in time. Would you swear with us? Based on the solemn swear affirm that the testimony you shall give this court should be true. Please state the spelling name for the record.
David Sides, S-I-D-E-S.
Sides, just to make sure I understand, you are the number 2 person with the Dunwoody Police Department, is that correct?
Yes, sir.
And you would have been the number 2 person back in November and December and January of 2010 and 2011, correct?
Correct.
You were the actual supervisor of Thompson, Cordellino, and Barnes, correct?
Correct.
Was the chief of police, was it Billy Grogan at the time?
Yes, sir.
And is he still the chief of police?
Yes, sir.
Was he actively involved in the investigation as well?
Physically involved? No, sir.
Actively, I'm sorry.
He got regular briefs.
Okay. When was it, as best you can recall, when Mr. Newman was developed as a suspect?
I can't recall the exact date.
Okay. Would it have been sometime in December of 2010? If you recall.
I cannot recall the exact time or the date in which Mr. Newman became a suspect.
Would it have been at the time link was made to the automobile in question, or the vehicle in question?
Yes, sir.
And you would have been kept up to date, I would imagine, on the progress of the investigation, would you not, sir?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Prior to interviewing Mrs. Sneiderman on the 5th, had you actually listened to her initial interview with Thompson and Cordellino on November the 19th?
No, sir.
Prior to the interview of Mrs. Sneiderman on January 5th, had you listened to Detective Thompson's interview with her on the 24th?
No, sir.
Okay. Prior to the actual, well, let me ask you this, on January the 4th, was Hemi Newman arrested?
He was arrested on January 4th.
And was Hemi Newman interviewed or interrogated by Lieutenant Barnes and Sergeant Cordellino at that time?
He was interviewed on January the 4th.
Okay, and was it by those 2 individuals?
Yes, sir.
Recall? Were you aware, and don't go into the subject matter, but were you made aware of the topics covered during the course of that particular interview, sir, when you, prior to interviewing Mrs. Sneiderman on the 5th?
Did not receive a detailed brief. I did not view the interview. I was aware that they were asking direct questions in regards to the murder of Rusty.
Okay. Had either Thompson or Cordellino given you a summary of the interviews that they had conducted with Mrs. Sneiderman on November 19th and November 24th prior to the time that you conducted your interview on January the 5th?
A summary, no, sir.
I'm sorry?
Not a summary, no, sir.
Okay. You were aware, were you not, that Mrs. Sneiderman had mentioned Mr. Newman's name in the first interview on November the 19th, correct?
I object, Your Honor, to lack of foundation. He has indicated that he did not review the 19th or the 24th, and so the only way he would become aware if somebody told him, and that would be hearsay.
Response, Mr. Clay.
I'm just trying to find out what his state of mind was and what he knew at the time that he conducted the interview with Mrs. Sneiderman on January the 5th of 2011, Your Honor. I'm not asking him to go into the specific nature of it.
Mr. James.
His state of mind would not be relevant when he interviewed the defendant. However, the defendant's state of mind would be.
Anything else, Mr. Clay, on that issue?
No, sir, nothing else on the subject.
I'm going to sustain that objection. Let's move on.
Okay. Were you familiar with Newman's name at all prior to the vehicle being recovered?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And the source of that information was what, sir?
The defendant.
Okay. When you say the defendant, is that Mrs. Sneiderman?
Correct.
Okay. There were not at the time a whole lot of homicides in Dunwoody. Is that a fair statement, sir?
We've had a number.
A number. What is that number, sir?
I believe since April of 09 when we went live, we've had 5.
Okay, so while they are not as prevalent in Dunwoody, for example, as they are in the city of Atlanta, obviously.
No, sir.
Okay. Were you aware, well, let me ask you this, at the time that this particular case was being investigated, was it the highest priority of the Dunwoody Police Department?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Were you aware that this was Detective Thompson's first homicide investigation?
Yes, sir.
Were you actively supervising him as a result in the course of the investigation?
Was I?
Yes.
No, sir.
Was Barnes, as far as you know?
Not as far as I know.
Okay. Was Cordelino?
Yes, sir.
Okay. To your knowledge, has he been a homicide investigator with the DeKalb County Police Department?
You've been an investigator and a detective supervisor with the DeKalb County Police Department for a number of years.
Okay. But as far as you know, had he been a homicide investigator?
Dedicated homicide investigator? No, sir. I don't know that.
Okay. Did you have a homicide division in the Dunwoody Police Department back in November of 2010?
We do not.
Okay. You do not, and when you say we do not, does that mean you do not today?
We do not have a homicide division.
And you would not have at that time, correct?
No, sir.
Okay. When you interviewed Mrs. Sneiderman on the 5th of January of 2010, did you consider her to be a suspect at that time?
Not a suspect, no, sir.
Did you consider her to be a person of interest at that time?
Yes, sir.
Define person of interest.
Well, because we didn't have a foundation and motive for the murder of Rusty at that time, we were exploring possible motives and connections.
Okay. And this is the time you'd already arrested on the 5th, Hemi Newman, correct?
No, sir, on the 4th.
Okay. I'm talking about the 5th. Did you consider her to be a person of interest on the 5th?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So when you were actually speaking to her and interviewing her on the 5th, you had already arrested Mr. Newman, correct?
Correct.
He had been arrested the day before, correct?
Yes, sir.
You were familiar with the fact that the vehicle, the Kia Sedona, had been linked to him at that time, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. When she came in to talk to you on the 4th, she was not a suspect either, correct?
She was not a suspect on the 4th.
Okay. Was she a person of interest as of the 4th?
No, sir.
Okay. Did you tell her that Newman had been linked to the car on the 4th?
I don't believe that we told her any information in regards to Hemi Newman being linked to the vehicle or his pending arrest.
Okay. So as you were talking to her, you were aware that at the same time, either it already happened or Newman was about to be taken into custody, correct?
Yes, sir.
She brings Newman's name up on the 4th, correct?
Yes, sir.
Why is it that you didn't tell her?
Once again, we did not know who was involved in the foundation for the murder of Rusty on the 4th.
Well, you said she was not a suspect on the 4th, correct?
That's correct.
And she was not a person of interest on the 4th,
Not on
correct?
the 4th.
Absent disclosing any information concerning the investigation to her, did you ask her any questions about Hemi Newman on January 4th when she came to meet with you and Chief Grogan?
I did not know, sir.
Do you recall if Chief Grogan did?
I do not.
Okay. But you do recall the name coming up, correct?
Yes, sir.
How long was that meeting that you would have had with Mrs. Sneiderman on the 4th, if you recall, sir?
I don't recall.
Okay. Can you give an estimate at all, or you simply don't recall at all, sir?
30 minutes, less than an hour.
Okay. If I understood correctly, you were not taking notes, is that correct?
That is correct.
Was Chief Grogan taking notes?
Yes, sir.
Now, he's on top, right? He's the
Yes, sir.
boss. You're second in command.
Yes, sir.
Is it typical for the chief to take notes and the subordinate not to take notes?
It's his meeting. He makes the determination on how to record his meeting.
Okay. And again, that meeting was not particular, that meeting was not actually recorded, is that correct, sir?
That's correct.
Now, when you began the interview with Mrs. Sneiderman on the 5th, you made reference to the fact that investigators from Dunwoody PD had gone out and met with folks at General Electric. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Had in fact they done so?
They were there that day.
Okay. Do you know whether or not they would have had, or how many officers, investigators from Dunwoody had gone out to meet with folks from GE on that day, which would have been January the 5th?
I don't know, sir.
Okay. Do you recall whether they would have taken that sketch with them?
I don't know that.
Okay. Do you recall whether or not they were instructed to ask representatives of GE about any connection between Andrea Sneiderman and Hemi Newman?
I'm unaware of any investigative instructions they were given.
Who is it who would have dispatched these folks out to GE?
Either Lieutenant Barnes or Sergeant Corlino.
Would they have, do you have any recollection of either one of them discussing what they were going to do at that time or what they were trying to find out at GE?
I know that we were issuing or serving warrants, but I don't know what the target of those warrants were.
Okay. Obviously, you were aware of that fact when you had the interview with Mrs. Sneiderman, correct?
Correct.
You specifically told her about that, correct?
Yes, sir.
During the course of the interview, you asked her a question basically posing this issue. What is it do you think folks at GE are going to say, right?
I asked her, I think, what is it you think they told us?
Okay. And at that time, did you know what they had told you?
No, sir.
So you had no idea one way or the other?
I did not know what they had been told.
Okay. When you told her, when you asked that particular question, specifically, what were you referring to? Told us about what?
Told us about a relationship she may or may not have had with Hemi Newman.
So you understood, you did understand that when the police went out to General Electric on the morning of January the 5th, they were specifically trying to find out information concerning the relationship between Mr. Newman and Mrs. Sneiderman. Is that correct? Okay. How many interviews, if you know, were conducted with general employee representatives or General Electric employees by representatives of the Dunwoody Police Department on January the 4th?
I don't know.
Okay. Are you aware of any General Electric employee ever taking a look at the sketch which had been created in the course of the investigation and saying, come to think of it, that looks like Hemi Newman?
I'm not aware of that, no, sir.
Okay. Would the statements, to your knowledge, with General Electric employees have been tape recorded?
If it was a formal interview, it would have.
Okay. What is the difference between a formal interview and an informal interview?
An informal interview is simply a conversation to establish a baseline of information. A formal interview is intended to record data or information for further investigative needs.
Okay. To your knowledge, on the morning of January 5th of 2011, were any of the interviews done with General Electric employees formal interviews?
I don't know, sir.
Can an informal interview become a formal interview during the course of the actual interview process?
It can.
So typically, an investigator would bring a tape recorder along with them in case they wanted to detail the exact language that had been said by a witness, correct?
They can, yes, sir.
They can. Do you know whether that was the procedure that was followed in this case or not, sir?
I do not know.
Do you recall the identity of any of the investigators or officers who were actually dispatched out to GE on the morning of January the 5th?
Specifically GE, no, sir.
Okay. If I understand correctly, no one had gone out to GE beforehand. Beforehand, when I say beforehand, before the arrest of Hemi Newman to ask any questions of any employee at GE at that time, correct?
Specifically ask questions, based from my understanding of your question, I don't know the answer to that.
Okay. Do you know, based on your understanding of the investigation, whether anyone from the Dunwoody Police Department had gone out to General Electric and interviewed any employee prior to the arrest of Hemi Newman?
I don't know that.
Okay. Okay. You knew at that time Newman was the primary suspect, correct?
On January 5th, he was in custody.
Okay. But prior to that, once the car was connected up, you knew he was the primary suspect, right?
Yes, sir.
You certainly knew that as of January the 4th, correct?
Yes, sir.
Would there have been any reason for the Dunwoody Police Department to delay in taking Mr. Newman into custody once the link had been established between the vehicle, the Kia Sedona, and Mr. Newman?
Geography, develop additional information.
Do you know of any additional information that was gathered between the time when the Kia Sedona was linked to Mr. Newman and when Mr. Newman was actually taken into arrest?
No, sir, I do not.
Do you have any knowledge of the extent of the investigation which was conducted between the time that the Kia Sedona was linked to Mr. Newman and the date of Mr. Newman's actual arrest?
No, sir, I don't.
At some point, let me ask you this. Did your investigation continue well after January the 5th?
Yes, sir.
Okay. At some point, did any representative of the Dunwoody Police Department ever go out to the Renaissance Waverly Hotel to determine whether or not Hemi Newman had rented a room at that location on July 26th of 2010?
Your Honor, I'm going to object at this juncture. It's improper foundation. If he wants to ask the witness if he went out, I have no objection, but if he's asking what someone else did, the only way he could know that would be if they came back and told him, and that would be hearsay.
I'm going to sustain that objection.
Did you go out to the Renaissance Waverly Inn and investigate whether or not Hemi Newman had rented a room at that hotel on July 26th of 2010?
I did not.
Did you instruct any representative or member of the Dunwoody Police Department to in fact do so?
No, sir.
Okay. Did anyone ever report back to you concerning such an investigation?
Objection, Your Honor. Again, hearsay.
I'm going to sustain that objection.
Okay. On the morning of the 5th, you began the interview talking about telling Mrs. Sneiderman, the first thing she said initially was that she had a gut feeling that it was Hemi Newman, correct?
She said that. I don't recall when she said it.
Okay. Williams, at this point, would you put a relevant portion of the previously admitted interview of Mrs. Sneiderman? Have you heard that? Does that refresh your memory that she in fact said that she had a gut feeling that it was Hemi Newman?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now that was right at the beginning of the interview, was it not?
Yes, sir.
You also heard during the course of that interview, I guess, what made me feel so strongly yesterday. That was terminology that Mrs. Sneiderman used, correctly?
Yes, sir.
Can you tell us, did she come across strongly the day before on January the 4th?
In some ways, she was very direct.
Okay. And was she direct in regard to the subject of Hemi Newman?
I do not recall that.
Okay. You do recall she was direct as to something, correct?
She was direct in providing a certain list or number of names in regards to people who could have been involved. The most direct emotional statement she made on the 4th that I recall was she was upset about someone who had not come to the funeral.
Okay. Did she tell you that during the course of the interview that Mr. Newman had had feelings for her?
She did.
Okay. Did she tell you that Mr. Newman had made those clear in emails?
She said that he had made them clear.
Okay. Sir, if you would play the second portion of the tape, please. Now, the subject of emails did come up, correct?
Yes, sir.
That was not in response to a question posed by either you or Lieutenant Barnes. It was information volunteered by Mrs. Sneiderman, was it not?
It was after questions were asked. I don't recall a specific question about exchange of emails.
Okay. And prior to, at the beginning of the interview, you told Mrs. Sneiderman that everything was going to be made public, correct?
Yes, sir.
You let her know that ultimately information that she disclosed would be turned over to the DA's office, correct?
Yes, sir.
And in turn, the information that was disclosed to the DA would subsequently be disclosed to counsel for whoever Mr. Newman chose to hire, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. And at that point, the subject of emails is discussed, correct? There is a brief period where she brings up or talks about emails, correct?
There is a period of time where she discusses emails.
And at some point, someone from the Dunwoody Police Department asks her which email account that would be on, correct?
I asked her if it was her corporate or her private account.
And she indicated that in fact it would be on a corporate account, correct?
Yes, sir.
And she worked for GE, correct?
Correct.
And that is the account you thought she was specifically referring to,
Yes,
correct?
sir.
Did she provide the name of Alan Shackley to you during the course of that interview?
Yes, sir.
Did you subsequently have occasion yourself to interview Alan Shackley?
I did not.
Okay. Did you actually, other than Mrs. Sneiderman, participate in the interview of any witness in this case, sir?
No, sir.
She made reference, did she not, also in the course of the interview of communications between her and Mr. Newman over a toast given at a holiday party, correct?
She did mention something about a holiday party.
And there was specifically a mention from her about communication back and forth between she and Mr. Newman, correct?
Yes, sir.
Did you know at that time when those communications were supposed to have occurred?
No, sir.
Okay. Did you ask during the course of the interview when it was that those communications actually occurred?
In regards to the party?
Yes.
No, sir.
Okay. Sir, would you please play the third clip? During the course of the email, Mrs. Sneiderman indicated that there had in fact been communication over either a text message, I guess, or an email between she and Mr. Newman about the holiday party, correct?
Yes, sir.
And that concerned apparently a prayer that Mr. Newman was saying that he had read at the holiday party, correct?
Yes, sir.
And at some point during the course of his communication, Mr. Newman is alleged to have said, I think everybody deserves a break, or words to that effect, right?
Yes, sir.
And Mrs. Sneiderman's response was, the only thing the world deserves, or anyone deserves, is for Rusty to be back on the planet, correct?
Yes, sir.
And then you tried to move on to another subject at that time, or ask a question, correct?
That's a clarification question, yes, sir.
Do you recall specifically what question you were going to ask at that time, recognizing it's been
No, sir.
32 months later?
No, sir.
Okay, but she then goes on to say that there was subsequent communication, at which point she said, do not text me, I don't want to hear from you, leave me alone. Words to that effect, correct?
To that effect, yes, sir.
Okay. Did you ask to look at her phone?
Lieutenant Barnes did.
Can you see did that occur during the course of the interview?
Yes, sir.
So the extent to which Mrs. Sneiderman's phone would have been examined back on January the 5th of 2011 is depicted in the video that we have watched, correct?
You can see her handing the phone to Lieutenant Barnes.
Okay. Other than that, was there any time during the course of January the 5th when the Dunwoody Police Department took her phone and actually examined it?
I don't think so. I don't know, though.
And is the video that we watched on Friday the entirety of the contact between Barnes and Mrs. Sneiderman?
I believe so.
Okay. So what we saw on Friday would show the extent to which Barnes had Mrs. Sneiderman's phone, correct?
To the best of my knowledge.
Okay. Did you ever actually take the phone yourself and examine it?
I did not.
Okay. Did she hesitate at all, or was she reluctant to provide the phone to Barnes?
No, sir.
Okay. At some point, she does bring up the subject of the iTunes having been sent on a Yahoo account, correct?
Yes, sir.
Okay. She's the one who brings up that it was not on the corporate account, but it was on an individual account, correct?
Yes, sir.
You asked her for information concerning her password on that account, correct?
I believe Lieutenant Barnes did. I believe she provided it.
And she actually gives the password, right?
Yes, sir.
Which I believe was Rusty or words to that effect, correct?
Lowercase Rusty.
Okay. Did you ask to see the actual email itself that she was referring to while she had her phone in her possession?
Did I?
Yes.
No, sir.
Did you have any interest in seeing it?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Would you play the next tape, please, sir? Okay. The phone is sitting right there on the table or the desk during the course of the interview, right?
Yes, sir.
Did you ask her, let me see it so I can look at that email?
Did I? No, sir.
Okay. Did you ever physically handle the phone yourself?
I did not.
Okay. And can you estimate, if you can, for the ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the amount of time that Barnes, who was with you during the majority of the interview, would have actually physically been in possession of the phone?
No, sir.
To your knowledge, did you ever ask Mrs. Sneiderman if the police could have her phone to examine?
I did not.
Did you ask if you could keep the phone?
I did not.
Did Barnes, in your presence, ever make such a request?
He did not.
When she walked out of the Dunwoody Police Department on that day, did she still have her phone?
She did.
Okay. She did tell you during the course of the interview that she had told several people about Mr. Newman's expression of interest in her. Did she not?
Yes, sir.
She said that she had told some
At this time, the state would like to introduce certified copies of pleading to defense counsel, and they are marked as state's exhibits number 65, 66, and 67. They're certified copies of documents. State's exhibit number 65 is a certified copy of the indictment, State versus Henry Newman, and that's 11 CR 1364-5.
Mr. Witnesses, Mr. Petrie.
Well, I'm not sure we got a witness.
Well, I know we have a witness, but I'm saying, I think the lawyer respond.
Yes, sir. We have no objection to 65.
All right. This is a notified objection.
Thank you, Your Honor. State's exhibit number 66 is a certified copy of a pleading, actually two pleadings, in the reference State versus Henry Newman, 11 CR 1364-5. It is one exhibit with two documents attached. The first is the defense, Mr. Newman's notice of intention to raise the issue of insanity. It's filed September 16, 2011. The second item in State's exhibit number 66 is the state's emergency motion for an order permitting the state's expert to conduct a forensic psychological evaluation of the defendant pursuant to the defense motion of intent to pursue an insanity defense. That's State's exhibit number 66.
Any objection, Mr. Speaker, to 66? 66, a notified objection.
And finally, Your Honor, State's exhibit number 67 is a copy of the sentence sheet in State versus Henry Newman, 11 CR 1364-5, as well as a copy of the jury verdict form filled out. And attached to that is the indictment. That's State's exhibit number 67.
Any objection, 67?
No, sir.
All right, 67 is a notified objection. All right, thank you, Mr. Petrie. Thank you, Ms. Cross. Call your next witness.
Your Honor, before calling the next witness,
You may.
the state would also seek to identify at this time State's exhibits number 68, 69, 70, and 71.
68, 69, 70, and 71.
Yes, Your Honor. Very large binders. State's exhibit number 68 is the stipulated phone records for Andrea Sneiderman's cell phone.
That's 6.
Your Honor, State's exhibit number 69 is a stipulated exhibit. It is the phone records for Rusty Sneiderman's cell phone.
Any objection, Mr. Petrie, to 69?
No, sir.
69 is a notified objection.
Thank you, Your Honor. State's exhibit number 70, Your Honor, is a binder containing the stipulated cell phone records of Henry Newman.
7.
That's 70, Your Honor.
Mr. Petrie, any objection to 70? Say 7.
No, sir.
70 is a notified objection.
Your Honor, ask, before Mr. Petrie?
I'll ask you 71.
Before I do 71?
You may confer. I'm sorry, Ms. Cross, you may continue.
Your Honor, and State's exhibit number 71 is a binder containing the stipulated phone records of Jan De Silva, D-E-S-I-L-V-A. D-E-S-I-L-V-A.
Mr. Petrie, any objection?
No, sir.
Phone records of Mr. Jan De Silva. Any notified objection, you may call to the
Thank you, Your Honor.
You're welcome.
Your Honor, the State's now ready to call its next witness.
You may.
State calls Special Agent David Freeman, F-R-E-Y-M-A-N.
The judges. The judges.
solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you shall give this court should be the truth, whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Any more than one, may you see. Please state and spell your name for the record.
Special Agent David Fryman, F-R-E-Y-M-A-N.
All right, and Special Agent Fryman, can you tell the jurors, please, where are you employed?
I am employed with the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
And what do you do for the Federal Bureau of Investigation?
Currently, I'm assigned to do forensic analysis on digital media.
How long have you worked with the FBI?
I'm getting ready to start 17 years, my 17th year.
Can you tell the jurors a little bit about the unit that you described yourself being in? What do you do?
Well, right now I'm assigned to the Computer Analysis Response Team in the Atlanta Division. And basically we're assigned to analyze anything electronic or has digital media to it.
When you say digital media, can you tell the jurors what are you talking about?
Like desktops, laptops, cell phones, PDAs, GPSs.
And what kind of, and then we talk about analysis, can you describe for the jurors, please, what kind of analysis do you do? What sort of information do you look for on the devices that you just described?
Well, as far as the analysis part, basically our job is to preserve the evidence as best as we can in its original state. And then we take mostly an image of the data.
What do you mean an image? I'm sorry to interrupt. What is an image?
Sure. I was going to explain it. An image specifically is a bit for bit or a line for line, item for item image of the original. And basically we replicate that. And then my job after that is to go through it and to pull out what is visible to the normal user, and then also to attempt to retrieve other data that may still be there in its part or whole.
Why is it that you take an image of the information on the device before you begin your analysis?
Again, one of the critical things of our job is to try to preserve the evidence in its original state. And in doing so, we make an exact replication or attempt to make an exact replication of the original evidence so that we can review that or analyze that in its entirety. And it's the same as the original, as if we're looking at the original.
Agent Fryman, do you have any sort of certifications or formal qualifications that enable you to do the sorts of examinations that you described?
Yes, I have a certification, which our foundational certification is in Windows-based systems because most of the industry is in Windows. Most users, regular users, are familiar with Windows-based systems. So the first process is to get certified in a Windows-based system, and that's approximately 400 hours of the classroom and hands-on setting. And also we do our exams with somebody else that is already certified as kind of a mentor phase, and also conduct searches as well. So everything in the first one is Windows-based. Once we do that, and we have a few years normally under us, then we can apply for and go through the process of getting other certifications, which I do have in Macintosh systems, Linux-based systems, cell phones, PDAs, and GPSs.
And let me ask you, to summarize if you can, do you have any sort of yearly educational training or proficiency that enables you to keep up to date on the technology as it's changing?
We have a minimum of 80 hours that we have to attend as continuing education in our field. But again, with every single case comes new items, new media that we may or may not have seen before. So it's continuing whether it's a classroom setting or not. We're all constantly looking up the other media or other things that we come across.
Agent Fryman, can you approximate for the jury how many devices you've examined in your almost 17 years with the FBI?
Okay, so With my 17 years with the FBI, I've been actually a forensic examiner for almost 10 years. So out of that 10 years, we average, depending, but approximately, I average approximately 20 cases a year with at least 5 pieces of media. Again, some have 30, 40 items of evidence, and some maybe have 1 or 2 or whatever. But I'd say almost 1,000.
Mm-hmm. Have you testified before in court?
Yes,
And how many times?
numerous.
Have you ever been tendered as an expert in court?
Yes.
In what field?
For cell phones and also for GPSs specifically, and for Macintosh and the iPhone and the iPad specifically as well.
Your Honor, at this time, the state would tender Agent Fryman as an expert in the field of digital forensics.
Whose witness is this?
No, no objection.
All right, he's considered as an expert in this field. There's no objection from the defense.
Thank you, Your Honor. Agent Fryman, were you asked to examine any items in connection with the investigation into the murder of Rusty Sneiderman?
Yes.
First, tell me, were you asked to examine any items that were identified as belonging to Henry Newman?
Yes.
What were those items?
There was an iPad and an iPhone.
Let me ask you, were you asked to identify, or excuse me, to examine any items that were identified as belonging to General Electric or GE?
There was there was a hard drive that was provided that had 2 industry standard images, as I described before, exact replicas of the original that were provided that we were informed belonged to images of a laptop.
Your Honor, at this time, I'm interposing
Yes, sir.
objection. At this time, I don't think the witness is qualified to testify as to what was, or it's hearsay for him to testify as to what he was told about where these images came from. I don't believe there's a foundation for that answer.
Response?
Your Honor, what the items were identified as being for this investigator is not hearsay, it's just the items as they were identified. He's not testifying as to their origin, saying what was communicated to him and why he conducted the investigation.
I'm going to sustain the objection. You want to lay that foundation? Sustain that foundation?
Thank you. What other items specific to laptops or hard drives of laptops were you provided, Agent Fryman?
Okay, so specifically, would you like me to address the GE as well?
I want you just to answer my question. I'm asking
Sure.
you what images of laptop computers did you examine and where did you get them?
Your Honor, again, I'm going to object to that as being leading. My understanding is that the image that he received would not be from the laptop itself, so that would involve hearsay as to, if he examined an image, there needs to be a foundation laid for the accuracy of the image from the source.
You want to lay that foundation? I'm going to sustain the objection. Lay your foundation.
Agent Fryman, what other items were you asked to examine?
I was asked to examine 2 images provided on a hard drive that was provided by General Electric, that was password protected, that the password was specifically provided by General Electric in order to get into that device to obtain those 2 images off of there in order for me to continue my analysis from that point.
And Agent Fryman, once you obtained access to the images as you've described them, were you able to identify to whom or which individuals those 2 images, those 2 image laptop computers belong to?
Yes.
Again, I'm going to object. This witness can only testify as to what he looked at.
I understand.
He has no first-hand knowledge of whether or not, of what the source was for I believe there must be a foundation laid showing how these images were made. My understanding of his testimony was he did not create the images. The images were made theoretically of computers that he never actually saw the computers. I believe there must be a foundation laid to show that what he believes he was looking at an image of was in fact an accurate image.
Ms. Cross, response.
Your Honor, first my question to Agent Fryman was once he had access to the contents of the image, if he was able to determine it. But I would also note that a previous witness has testified, Katie Goff, who was the internal forensic examiner for GE, has testified that she imaged 2 laptop computer hard drives and provided them to the state at the state's request.
I understand that. But his objection is, you get to that point, how does it get to him? That's the objection on foundation. So you want to lay foundation?
Yes, Your Honor, I'll move on. I understand.
And actually, ladies and gentlemen, you've been going about an hour. I try to give you a break about every hour so that it's stay comfortable. This break is going to be in the neighborhood with the assistance of Deputy Garrett. I'm going to give you a stretch break in the jury room. It'll be in the neighborhood of 10 minutes, okay? Give me 10 minutes, Deputy Garrett. All right.